All right, let's step back in time. We're about to uncover a really fascinating series of ancient laws. We're going to dive right into the strict rules that govern the Israelite community, down to their military encampments. We're taking a close, step-by-step journey through the text to see exactly what it says and why it actually mattered.
Welcome to the Part Days channel. Today we explain Deuteronomy, chapter 23 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First, the assembly restrictions, then purity of the camp, followed by slaves and sanctuary and interest in integrity. After that, we'll hit some practical life lessons and finish up with a chapter 23 summary. Let's get started.
Section 1. The assembly restrictions, covering verses 1 to 8.
So, this opening section sets up some very specific ancient laws about who exactly is allowed to enter the assembly of the Lord. Now, when the text says assembly, think of it as the formal gathering, the community that has full rights and participation in Israel. Right off the bat, verses 1 and 2 set some very firm physical and marital boundaries. It states that no one emasculated by crushing or cutting can enter. Now, you might be wondering why such a specific rule. Well, historically, those kinds of physical alterations were often tied directly to surrounding ancient pagan rituals. So the text is putting a massive emphasis on physical wholeness to prevent any kind of blending with those pagan practices. Following that, verse 2 says no one born of a forbidden marriage, meaning a child from an illicit union, can enter either. And this rule is absolutely strict. It extends down to their descendants for 10 whole generations.
Moving on to verses 3 through 6, the focus shifts to specific neighboring nations, the Ammonites and the Moabites. The law lays down a permanent ban. It says no Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants down to the 10th generation may enter the assembly. So why such a harsh exclusion? The text gives us two really clear historical reasons. First, when the Israelites were coming out of Egypt, these nations literally refused to provide them with bread and water on their journey. Second, they actively hired Balaam, a foreign prophet and sorcerer, to put a curse on the Israelites. But, as verse 5 tells us, God loved Israel, wouldn't listen to Balaam, and actually turned that intended curse into a blessing. Because of this deeply rooted historical hostility, the command in verse 6 is completely absolute. Israel is told never to seek a treaty of friendship with them as long as they live.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the contrast we see in verses 7 and 8. While Ammon and Moab are permanently out, the rules completely flip for other nations based on their past historical relationships. The text literally says, "Do not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother." Since the Edomites descended from Esau, Jacob's brother, that family tie changes everything. Similarly, it says, "Do not abhor an Egyptian, because you lived as an alien in his country." Even though we know the Egyptian bondage was incredibly harsh, they originally gave Israel a home during a massive famine. So the law actually states that the third generation of children born to Edomites and Egyptians are allowed into the assembly. It's fascinating. Past actions and relationships directly dictate these community entry rules.
Section 2. Purity of the camp. This covers verses 9 to 14. All right. The text now zooms in from those macro community rules right down to the micro environment of a military encampment. Verse 9 gives us the overarching principle. When you are encamped against your enemies, keep away from everything impure. Then verses 10 and 11 get really specific about bodily purity, handling natural bodily functions respectfully but very firmly. It lays out an exact 3-step procedure for dealing with nocturnal emissions. Step 1. If a man becomes unclean because of this natural occurrence, he has to leave the camp and stay outside. Step 2. As evening approaches, he's required to wash himself thoroughly with water. And step 3. Only after the sun sets is he actually allowed back inside. It's a very strict routine for keeping ritual purity among the soldiers.
Verses 12 and 13 continue this whole theme, but focus on practical sanitary hygiene. The latrine laws here are simple, but absolutely mandatory. First, the camp has to set up a specific, designated area entirely outside the encampment bounds for soldiers to relieve themselves. Second, every single soldier has to carry a digging tool as part of their standard gear. And third, when they relieve themselves, they have to dig a hole and cover up their excrement completely. It's a highly practical regulation that stopped disease in its tracks and kept the physical environment of this ancient army remarkably clean. So the crucial point to all of this is explained right here in verse 14. Why go through all these strict rules about washing and digging holes?
The text says, "For the Lord your God moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you. Your camp must be holy, so that he will not see among you anything indecent and turn away from you." You see, the physical cleanliness of the camp is directly tied to a spiritual reality. God's holy presence is literally walking among them. If the camp is physically polluted, it's considered indecent. Their physical environment had to mirror their spiritual holiness.
Section 3, Slaves and Sanctuary, looking at verses 15 to 18.
Here, the explainer pivots towards social justice. Verses 15 and 16 detail a truly revolutionary ancient law about escaped foreign slaves. If a slave seeks refuge with an Israelite, the text is explicit: do not hand him over to his master. Instead, the Israelites are commanded to let the refugee live among them. And not just that, the escaped slave actually gets the freedom to settle in whichever town he chooses, wherever he likes it best. The section caps off with a firm command: do not oppress him. Guys, this was an act of radical compassion. Unlike the surrounding ancient cultures that would harshly punish runaway slaves or send them back for bounties, Israel was offering unprecedented asylum and safety within its borders.
Moving on, verses 17 and 18 are all about protecting the purity of Israel's worship. The text places an absolute ban on shrine or cultic prostitution, which, back then, was a super common element in neighboring pagan religions. It explicitly commands that no Israelite man or woman can become a shrine prostitute. And it goes further. It forbids anyone from bringing the earnings of a female or male prostitute into the house of the Lord to pay a vow. The text emphatically states that God detests both the practice itself and the illicit earnings. The sanctuary had to remain entirely uncorrupted by any kind of pagan fertility rituals.
Section 4. Interest and Integrity. This spans verses 19 to 25.
This final block of text dives deep into personal economics. Verses 19 and 20 lay out the literal laws regarding usury, which is charging interest on loans. The text draws a really sharp distinction based on exactly who is borrowing the money. When you're dealing with a brother Israelite, you absolutely cannot charge interest on money, food, or anything else. But when dealing with a foreigner in international commerce, you are permitted to charge interest. It's a neat separation between communal, brotherly help and standard cross-border business. And the text tags on a powerful promise here too. If you follow this rule and don't exploit your brother, the Lord your God will bless you in everything you put your hand to in the new land.
In verses 21 through 23, the focus shifts to verbal integrity, specifically when making vows to God. Now, a vow is just a voluntary promise. The law says that if you make a vow to the Lord, do not be slow to pay it. God will absolutely demand it, and dragging your feet makes you guilty of a sin. But what's really interesting is verse 22. It clarifies that if you just refrain from making a vow altogether, you aren't guilty of anything. However, as verse 23 wraps up, whatever your lips utter freely, you must be sure to do. The takeaway here is incredibly clear. Verbal commitments to God carry massive weight. Making a vow is totally optional, but once you speak it, fulfilling it with absolute integrity is mandatory.
And this brilliantly illustrates the final two verses of the chapter, verses 24 and 25, which deal with neighborly boundaries and gleaning. If you walk into your neighbor's vineyard, the law says you can eat all the grapes you want to satisfy your hunger right then and there, but you cannot put any into your basket to take home. Similarly, if you enter your neighbor's cornfield, and in this historical context we're talking about a field of standing grain like wheat or barley, you can pick the ears with your bare hands to eat, but you absolutely cannot put a sickle to his standing grain to harvest it. It's such a perfect balance, right? The law is generous enough to provide for someone's immediate hunger, but it strictly protects the neighbor's livelihood from theft or unauthorized harvesting.
Section 5. Practical Life Lessons. What we learn and how to improve.
So that wraps up the literal text. But how do these incredibly ancient, specific laws translate into timeless principles for us today? What can we actually learn, and how can we improve ourselves based on chapter 23? Well, we can easily distill these complex laws into 5 straightforward life lessons. First up, keep your word. Just like the Israelites had to fulfill their vows, we need to treat our spoken promises with the utmost seriousness. Second, practice cleanliness. Those military camp rules, they remind us that maintaining order and physical hygiene actually reflects a much deeper spiritual respect. Third, protect the vulnerable. The law shielding the runaway slave challenges us to offer safety and compassion to those in distress. Fourth, ethical finances. The interest laws teach us not to exploit our brothers and neighbors just to make a quick profit. And finally, respect boundaries. The vineyard and grainfield rules are a great reminder to take only what we need and never, ever exploit another person's generosity.
Section 6. Chapter 23 Summary. A short recap. Let's move to our timeline and see how this all builds across the text. This chapter flows with a very deliberate progression. It kicked off in verses 1 through 8 by defining the assembly rules, essentially drawing the physical and historical boundaries for who belongs in the formal community. Then, it zoomed right in with verses 9 through 14 to establish camp purity, showing us that God's presence absolutely demands a clean physical environment. From there, verses 15 through 20 pivoted to guarding social ethics, protecting the refugee slave, and mapping out economic fairness when it comes to charging interest. And finally, verses 21 through 25 established the immense weight of our vows and set strict neighborly limits to perfectly balance generosity with a fundamental respect for other people's property.
As we reflect on chapter 23, ask yourself, if an ancient camp had to be physically and ethically pure to host God's presence, what kind of boundaries do we need to set in our own lives today to do the exact same thing? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.